Hi, I'm Matthew Fontaine with Red River College. I'm a cross-connection specialist, and today I'm going to walk you through how to test the DCVA using a 3-valve test gauge. So the first thing we want to do is we want to notify the owner or the person in the business that we're going to be turning the water off temporarily. We also want to identify the unit. We want to make sure that the model number and the serial number match. Okay. We also want to make sure that there is nothing physically wrong with the unit. It's installed properly. It's in the right orientation. We also want to make sure that we have enough clearance around the device. Okay. So the first thing we want to do again is we want to bleed off all my test cocks because the unit has been sitting for at least a year. So we bleed off all the test cocks. Test cock 1, 2, 3, and 4. This helps eliminate any debris that's been sitting there, and again, any air that could be potentially in the unit. So with my 3-valve, I am going to hook up my high side hose to test cock number 2. I am then going to hook up my low side hose to test cock number 3. And because we are actually using a gauge and we're not utilizing a sight tube, I have to make sure that my gauge is at the same level as my device. Okay? So when I'm ready to read my procedures, I'll make sure that my gauge is pretty close to the same level as the check valve. But I also need to open up test cock number 2 and number 3 again simultaneously. So I'm just going to temporarily hang up my gauge. And I'm going to slowly open up test cock 2 and 3 to make sure that I don't slam my gauge. So now I'm trying to eliminate all the air that is in the gauge itself. So I want to close my high side. I want to close my vent, and I want to close my bypass. Okay? I want to reopen up my high side. And I want to make sure that my gauge is set at the right elevation. So I want it to be pretty close to the same center line as I can with my device. Okay? So looking at my gauge, I am seeing that I have a 1 psi differential across check valve number 1. That is the bare minimum requirement that I am allowed to have on a DCVA check valve number 1. I would wait my 2 minutes to make sure that my gauge doesn't drop. I am then also going to make sure that shutoff valve number 2 is closed. So at that point, I'm going to close shutoff valve number 2, and I'm also going to close shutoff valve number 1. So now that both shutoff valves are closed, I have absolutely no movement going through. I'm going to wait my 2 minutes, make sure that my gauge doesn't drop. After those 2 minutes, again, it passes. So we've waited our 2 minutes. Our pressure differential gauge is reading 1 psi-d. It has met that minimum requirement. Again, close shutoff or test cock number 2 and number 3. Depressurize my gauge. Open up all my valves. And then I'm going to transfer my 2 hoses, my high side and my low side, over to test cock number 3 and number 4. So again, I'm just going to hang my gauge, transfer over my hoses. So again, my low side is going to test cock number 4. My high side is going to test cock number 3. I do have to open up shutoff valve number 1 again to make sure that I have water flowing through so that I can bleed out the air out of my gauge. So I open up shut-off valve number 1. I am again going to open up both test cocks simultaneously to prevent any kind of slamming of my gauge. All right. So again, I'm going to close my high side. Going to close my bypass, and I'm going to close my vent, and I'm going to reopen up my high side again. I then have to shut off valve number 1 again. Lower my gauge so that it's pretty close to the same center line as my device. And again, I'm going to watch my pressure gauge to see if my needle drops. I have to wait the 2 minutes. If my needle drops below 1 psid, check valve number 2 in this case would fail. If it's at 1 or better than 1, check valve number 2 is considered closed and held tight. So we waited our 2 minutes. We're looking at our gauge, and I'm seeing that again our gauge is sitting at 1 psid. Therefore, check valve number 2 also passes. We have done both tests that we need to do for a DCVA. So again, I can turn off test cocks number 2, 3, and 4. Make sure that everything is closed. I can reopen up shut-off valve number 1. I can reopen up shut-off valve number 2. So that way the place of business is back into service. Before we end up leaving, we've depressurized our gauge. We've disconnected all our hoses. And then again, I have to, because it's a 3 valve, I don't have line pressure gauge on the device like a 5 valve does. I have to take a separate gauge and a separate hose, and I'm going to have to record my line pressure. Now that I've gotten my hose and my gauge, I'm going to hook it up to test cock number 1. Open up test cock number 1. And I am going to look at the gauge itself, and I'm going to record what that line pressure is. And in this case, we're looking at approximately 51, 52 psid, pressure. So I'd record 51 psi on my report. Disconnect, depressurize. And that's how you do a test on a DCVA using a TK9A or any 3 valve for that matter. From Red River College, I'm Matthew Fontaine.